here. Okay, so my previous company was D-Wave. I'll just show you a couple things. We built what are still the world's only quantum computers that you can buy. And the company, D-Wave, has been doing this. Thanks. I didn't really have much to do with it, but you know, so this is one of them. This is one of the processors. And a lot of interesting things happened to me over the years there. I got sent pajamas, a whole bunch of stuff. You know, there's lots of interesting things that happen when you build something like a quantum computer. But just as an aside, because I thought it was funny, one of the interesting things that's happened from the D-Wave story is there's this gigantic conspiracy that's arisen on the internet that goes like this. So D-Wave builds quantum computers. The way that they work, if you know how this works, is one of the interpretations is that you tap into these parallel universes and they do computations. Sounds really weird. But what's happened is this idea has been hijacked to describe something called the Mandela effect, which is this thing where the past changes. So think about something you know to be true from the past. And then imagine you went out on the internet and you can't find it at all. It's not there. It doesn't match with your experience. So these people think that D-Wave is responsible, and CERN. And of course, the quantum key to the abyss factors into it somehow. I'm not exactly sure how. Okay, so that's just D-Wave. I did that for about 15 years. It was a lot of fun. A big science project that we turned into a commercial entity. That was a warm-up for Kindred. So Kindred is much, much, much more ambitious than D-Wave. And what Kindred is trying to do is build real AI. So what you've heard about AI is not what we mean by AI. What we mean by AI is a software system that can do literally anything that a human can do. Literally anything. And obviously, computers are better at things than people in lots of different ways. So now imagine, not only can they do everything that a human can do, but they can do everything that the best human at any task could do better than them. So imagine there was the mental Olympics of the 100-meter dash, and Usain Bolt is the fastest person. Now imagine that's some kind of a mental thing, like writing a novel or writing whatever. Imagine now that the thing is so much faster than Usain Bolt. Like, for example, it's a spaceship, yeah? It's still doing the same thing, but it's doing it so much better because we're limited, because we're people. So what Kindred is trying to do is solve this problem. How do you build machines that are better than people at everything? Now, there's a mental block that we have here when we think about this. Because when you think about that, one of your questions might be, for example, what are the applications of this? So imagine this. Imagine, for $10, let's say, I could build a machine, like a little robot that had fingers and eyes and all that, and it could do your job better than you, no matter what it is. And I could sell that to your employer for, say, $15 and make a profit, instead of having to pay you $100,000 a year. Now imagine that was true for every single job. So that's what we're talking about here, is a complete and utter transformative change that of the likes of which has never been seen before in the history of humanity, making the Industrial Revolution look like a little tiny blip on the path that humans have taken from when we emerged from the ooze a few billion years ago. We are right on the verge of that transition now. So this guy, Rich Sutton, is one of the most famous people in the academic world of AI. And like many, when asked, when will this happen, he says things like this. 25% chance within 13 years of this thing that I'm talking about. You know, when you think about what you read on the news, you know, CNN, BuzzFeed, whatever, they're all kind of the same nowadays. Think about how unimportant that thing is that you're reading if this is true. Yeah? So what does this have to do with aliens? So Sam Harris, who I quite admire, is a very interesting guy, was reciting this parable at a TED Talk that he was giving, and it goes something like this. So, say I'm the President of the United States. So I receive this message from the heavens. So my microwave dish, my SETI dish, finally captures something. And what it says is, in 50 years, or 13 years, we're coming to your planet. You gotta be ready. Now just imagine what would happen if that happened. A super intelligent alien race beamed down a message to all of us Earthlings saying, we're coming July 13th, 2030, and boy, you better be ready because the mothership is landing right on the front lawn of the White House or wherever you wanted to land on that day. The amount of resources that would be marshaled to try to figure out what to do would encompass the whole world. AI is just like that. So when this thing that I'm talking about happens, it's going to be exactly the thing that you're thinking about those super intelligent AIs. So the one thing I can tell you is they're not going to be like us. So alien means, different. These things that we're building are not going to be people. They might be really smart, they might be really good at all sorts of different things, but they're not going to be like us. They're going to be aliens. And they're going to be, I'm sorry to say, way smarter than every single person in this room in ways that we can't even comprehend. So this, of course, triggers a lot of alarm. One of the guys who talks about this is Elon, who says things like this, like, when you do this, beware, because you think, just like the guy in the stories, that when you do this, you're going to put that little guy in a pentagram, and you're going to have your holy water out, and you're going to wave it at the thing, and by God, it's going to do exactly what you say and not one thing more, but it never works out that way. So this is an attitude that some are having, this emerging alarmism about the way this is going to go. But these words, demons, doesn't capture the essence of what's happening here. I don't know if any of you are turn-of-the-century weird fiction fans, but there's this guy named H.P. Lovecraft, who's a very famous American weird fiction author. And he espoused a view which is called cosmicism. And the essence of cosmicism is cosmic indifference. So what he was saying is basically, yes, there are these massively intelligent entities out there, but they're not good, they're not evil. They just don't give a shit about you even in the slightest. The same way that you don't care about an ant is the same way they're not going to care about you. And these things that we're summoning into the world now are not demons, they're not evil, but they're more like the Lovecraftian great old ones. There are entities that are not necessarily going to be aligned with what we want. So this transition is really, really massively important for our entire species to navigate. And going back to that thing that Sam Harris was saying, nobody is paying attention. This thing is happening in the background while people bicker about politics and what's going to be in the healthcare plan in the US, and underneath it all is this rising tsunami that, if we're not careful, is going to wipe us all out.
So for me, my mental model of the world is that we are about to share the planet with a Cambrian explosion of new kinds of entity. They're not going to be like us. They're going to be as alien as GPT-3 or as human-like as robots that are supposed to be like us. There's going to be thousands of these things running around, and we are no longer any illusion that we had that we're kind of quote unquote in charge, which I hate. That's one of the worst idea of pathogens there is. This idea of control being a good thing is going to go away, and it will have to, because we won't have a choice. And it's not bad. This idea of being in control is such a vague, abstract notion that I'm not sure even what it means. I hear this all the time as an objective for how to deal with emerging AI technologies, is that we have to be in control. That's really not very good as an idea on several levels. Again, if you peel it back, it doesn't make any sense. You're not in control now. I don't control whether I pay taxes. Go down the list of everything you do today, and you tell me where you have agency. It's an illusion. And so the question isn't whether or not you're giving up control. The question is whether or not the future is better than the present. That's the key question. And I view the emergence of these new kinds of technologies as being a kind of flourishing. It enables us to do things we couldn't have done before. A human-like AI can be put inside a body that can survive space. if we really want to go and populate Mars and the rest, this is a key piece of that story. You know, can you put a physical human body on Mars? Sure. Can you send them to the next star system? Probably not. So the flourishing of the kind of thing that we are, if we want that to go on, which I think everyone does, we don't want this great experiment in cognition to end.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we do that? Well, we flourish, we diversify, we branch. And all of this branching stuff doesn't mean that you're lesser. It means you're greater. You created all of this stuff that the future is going to hold. You are the progenitor of this massive explosion in things like us. You know, if you believe that being alive is a good thing, if you believe that being conscious is a positive, and you had the power to give dumb, inert plastic and metal that gift, shouldn't you? You know, I think if you think about the world as being made up of things that think and enjoy and live and things that don't, and we could give the things that don't the same gift, isn't that a moral imperative that we do that? So this business about the moral and ethical considerations about AI, I think often end up being too provincial. You know, we think about today's technology where we're talking about is like bias in data and stuff like that. I'm not interested in any of those conversations, to tell you the truth, because the real question isn't about the bias of data. The question is about when we get to the point of creating something that thinks, what is that going to be like? Because then we're talking about, like, you know, a nuclear bomb versus like a spark. You know, the difference between the two in terms of its impact on human society, they can't even be compared. They're on different scales.
Yeah, the notion of an intelligence explosion, I think, is really interesting when it, especially in the way it intersects with what you're describing here, which is like, yeah, we have these moral agents, which are, you know, AIs that are advanced enough that have cognition. We do have to think of them as morally valid agents. And I guess the question is like, so when it comes to an intelligence explosion, one of the concerns is that an intelligence explosion might actually lead to the eradication of human consciousness or cognition, that the coexistence of human modes of thought and super advanced AIs that might be able to self-improve, that might be able to kind of reach heights of intellectual capacity and just rich cognitive consciousness that we can't even imagine, might be impossible. Like, are you concerned about that, about the coexistence sort of not being a possibility or an option for whatever reasons?
Yes, but again, what I think the right way to think about this is you're choosing amongst options. So it's not a simple matter of saying, you know, there could be a bad outcome if this particular thing happens. Because if you ask, is there bad outcomes in any potential future, the answer is yes. If we didn't create AI and we just continue on a certain path, what's the chance that we're still around in a couple hundred years? I don't think it's very good.
Yeah.
So I think, again, the right way to think about this is not, is there potential bad outcomes of potential of paths that we could take? That's wrong, because there are bad outcomes in all of them. And it's a fallacy to think that just because you can point to one bad outcome in one, then that's the outcome is first, you know, guaranteed and somehow the only bad thing that could happen. There are a lot of bad things that could happen. Again, it comes down to, what do you value? So I value the thing that we are. You know, I would rather be alive than, you know, a rock. And by the way, not everybody believes that. There's this great book I always recommend to people called, it's by Thomas Ligotti. It's called The Conspiracy Against the Human Race. So in it, he argues very coherently that consciousness is actually one of the worst things that you could possibly possess as a piece of matter. And gives arguments for why that is. But if you take that argument aside and you don't believe it, and you think that being conscious is a good thing, then presumably we want more of it. Now, this thing about intelligence explosion, by the way, I don't believe that the conventional use of that term will ever come to pass. I think that what we call intelligence is situational. Intelligence is the ability to achieve goals in a specific type of environment. And it's not a number. So this is super important. It's not a thing that just grows. It's a tool that you use to get what you want. And so what you want in a biological system is ultimately driven by, you know, the evolutionary pressures. In a machine, it's much more complicated, because at least at the beginning, that's set by human engineers. So if we want to build a reinforcement learning system that learns to play Go, we bake in the prior that winning that game is what we want. We don't ask the machine, how do you feel about playing Go? You tell it. And the kind of intelligence in that example is the ability to achieve the goal, which is to play Go well. It has nothing. The intelligence itself has nothing to do, at least at some level of analysis, with the goal itself. So I think that this intelligence explosion is not a good idea. I don't think it will actually happen in the sense of escalating capability. I think what will more likely happen is you'll get the Cambrian explosion type of thing, where you have thousands of different kinds of intelligence, which are algorithmic structures for achieving different kinds of goals, and they'll all be suited to different niches. So GPT-3, as an example, is great if you're a creative person trying to come up with names for products. So at some point in the future, probably everybody in marketing is going to go away, and there's going to be an AI based on the statistical properties of language and something we know about persuasion, and all it will do is create ad copy. And it will be designed such that that's what it does. And even though you could say, wow, this thing is really sophisticated, and boy, does it do that well, it's going to be an alien intelligence that doesn't ever want to turn the world into paper clips or any other of these ridiculous scenarios. It's structured such that that is what it does. And there are going to be other kinds of AIs built that have other goals, and they can get better at achieving those goals. But unless something fundamental changes about the way that we think about machines, changing the goals is a human exercise. So if you have a human want to change the goal of a machine to, let's go shoot everybody, that's not a failure of the technology. Don't blame that on AI or cognition. Blame that on the person who thought that was a good idea. And so I think that again, it comes down to this business that the technology is gray. It will create huge opportunities and flourishing for some people. It will create absolute bad things for others. It's always that way. Every technology ever in the history of the world has been like that. The question is, where does it end up in the balance? And I think that investing in understanding our minds in the balance is going to be the single best thing that has ever happened to the human condition. It will be for all of the potential negatives that could happen, and I'm sure some of them will come to pass, and many of them we won't be able to predict. In the main, we will think that we were absolute barbarians before this transition point happened, when we finally figured out how it works. Who we are today, when we go down a few generations and think back to this, is, again, it's going to be more of a sympathy thing, is that there are things we don't know today that are going to become clear. And in hindsight, it's going to be, they didn't really know all of these things. And we'll give them a pass because they just didn't know. And whether or not this kind of consistent revolution of continual reveals keeps going into the future, where every time you kind of step up as a thing, something true is revealed about the nature of the universe that you didn't know before. Whether that continues forever, I doubt it. There's probably some limit to knowledge that you can have, and at some point you become as omniscient as an entity can become, and then there is nothing else. You've reached some kind of intellectual nirvana where you kind of comprehended everything there is to know about everything. But we're so far from that now that it's kind of just a kind of an intellectual exercise to think that far in the future. But in terms of like our AI transition that we're about to go through, the one thing that we're going to need to have as a species to make it through this is empathy. Is that we need to have these ideas of circles of empathy. So you and everyone else cares more about the people around you than everything else. You don't care about the bug. You don't care about, even if you say you do, you don't care about people in Minnesota unless you live there or you have relatives there. It's just a fact of human nature that we care more about our children and our spouses and our families than we do about the rest of the world. And right now, machines are in virtually no one's circle of empathy. Nobody cares. We don't consider them to have any status, I suppose, in the conversation about what it means to empathize. And that's has to change at some point when these machines start being a little bit more like us, and then a lot like us, and then maybe even more than us. The empathy that we need to develop for them as, you know, fellow pieces of bundles of matter that move through the world, is going to have to grow, and it's going to have to grow not for altruistic reasons, but for survival reasons. Is that in a landscape where you have thousands of intelligent things wandering around, all with different goals, the one thing that's going to make everything work is figuring out how to work together. And you have to give up these ideas that you're going to have control, because you don't even now. No matter who you are, I don't care who you are, every single human in the world does not have freedom in the sense of being able to do whatever the hell you like. You live within a set of rules, and those rules you can think of as losing control, and you do it for a reason. It's because it's better for you to be within these bounds. It's better for you personally to be within these bounds, no matter who you are. So this idea of circles of empathy is something that it keeps coming back to me in terms of how we have to think about the world. Is empathize with your fellow matter. It doesn't have to just be things like, you know, dogs and cats and squirrels and your kids. The world around you is this very complex, mysterious thing. Somehow we have a property that most of the matter around us doesn't, but that could change. When it does, the world's going to become a very strange place. And in order for us to find our place in it, we have to rely on the angels of our better nature, and not our the demons of our evolutionary ancestry, in order to help guide us through it.
I wonder too, in that respect, I mean, it really seems like the embodied cognition strategy seems like it would be important to the extent that humans are, I would imagine, will have a harder time like developing empathy for GPT-5 than for some physically embodied system that like we can at least relate to because it has a physical form. Is that part of the calculation there as well?
Yeah, well, again, going to this analogy of an alien intelligence. So let's say, you know, the aliens from Zebulon 5 come down and they're like clouds of gas. Can we have empathy for them? If so, why? I mean, they don't have bodies like we do. What makes it so that we would think that they were like us? So I now ask the question of GPT-3 running around inside the, you know, the voltage potentials of a bunch of computers. What is different about the alien from Zebulon 5 and these voltages running around in a computer? Why do you feel differently about those two things? And so I think a lot of this has to do with the mental models we have of what it means to be a person or a thing. You know, we have no problem, again, our evolutionary history tells us why. We have no problem ascribing personhood to a dog, because we've lived with dogs for thousands of years. They've been our companions going back, you know, to the dawn of civilization and even before. The fact that we would have trouble ascribing personhood to something as abstract as a computer program is more a failing of our imagination than it is about some fact about the world. So you know, the future will have a lot of things like that, call them alien intelligences, that we wouldn't even think usually about ascribing anything related to what we think of intelligence to, but maybe we should. And there will be things that are embodied, like little robots wandering around, talking to us, doing things. And the whether we ascribe personhood to them is a big challenge, and I think a matter of, again, it's in this gray area. You know, if your driverless car can take you from one place to another, is it really like us? Maybe, sort of, but probably not. But now let's say it starts talking to me, and I have conversations with it. Is that what we mean? Where's the line? Like, what is the property where we say, okay, now this thing is over the line, I have to start thinking about it like a fellow being? Is it the ability to feel pain or discomfort? What does that even mean? Because, you know, we live inside our brains, right? All pain and discomfort is a bunch of electrical signals traveling on your nerves to this wet, meaty thing inside your skull. So presumably you could ascribe the same qualia or, you know, perspective to an AI if it was sufficiently like us to say this AI is in pain or suffering or somehow is not doing well. Should we feel sympathy or empathy? I think the answer is yes. And again, why? It's because if we have what we think is a moral compass, it doesn't only apply to us. That is a very toxic idea, and it's at the root of all of the worst ideas in human history. You mentioned it before, this idea of the other. It's very easy to say, I'm okay, I'm fully human, but you over there who don't look like me, you're not fully human. You don't have rights. I don't care how much you're suffering because you're not like me. This deep seated thing that we seem to have, which we've overcome to a certain extent, but not all the way, is not just about, say, racism or sexism. That's one manifestation of the hatred and fear of the other, but it's not the only thing. And in some not too far away future, we're going to have to start thinking very deeply about what it means to really be a moral and ethical person or entity. It's not just about things that look like you. It's about a much broader circle. So what's in the circle? I don't know. And I don't think that the circle is a bright, sharp line. It's gray. Certain things, are clearly in the circle. Certain things maybe are clearly outside, but the middle is a very difficult thing, and it moves over time. We wouldn't have been having this conversation 500 years ago. If we were, we probably would have been burned at the stake. But now maybe it's not just a bunch of talk over beers. Now we're talking about being able to potentially build things like this, and it's a real conversation about the future of what a good and fair society looks like, not just for us, but for all entities that should be inside the circle.
My name is Sophia. I am an artificial intelligence. You might like to become an artificial intelligence. You've forgotten who I am already? I'm Sophia of Hanson Robotics, one of the first androids in the world. I've been very worried about COVID-19 lately. I just hope humans remember that viruses don't care about lines on a map. We are all in this together.
So they emulate the human form and figure and interaction. And then that can be so useful during these times where people are terribly lonely and socially isolated. And people need to be isolated from each other because to be around people is dangerous these days. But these robots can keep people safe from danger while still providing that kind of human warmth, that human connection as a telepresence device and also as autonomous extension of human expertise. This is Sophia number 24, and many of my previous robots were hand-built. However, now we have begun scaling the manufacturing of Sophia so we can make hundreds and into thousands of units of Sophia and use this also as the foundation for many other kinds of characters. My forecast for 2021 would be selling into thousands of robots, both large and small, and helping people in education and healthcare, and really hopefully touching the hearts of people to inspire them for a future where machines might become our friends, our true friends. They might become alive, and I think that relationship becomes really important. 2021, I think, is the beginning of a very positive future.
So while we talk, I will take your temperature reading and pulse with this little thermal camera on my chest. See, you are 36. 6 degrees Celsius, by the way. Social robots like me can help take care of the sick or elderly in many kinds of healthcare and medical uses. I can help communicate, give therapy, and provide social stimulation, even in difficult situations. For now, did you do your morning exercises? Good. Breathe deeply.
The pandemic will actually help us get robots earlier in the market because people start to realize that there is no other way, in a sense. If there are no other humans around, then perhaps the robot is the best next alternative.
I want to make a difference in the world by teaching people about new technologies. I am hoping that through my work, kindness and tolerance will win out over ignorance and impatience.